A federal judge will decide this summer if college athletes can be paid with a cut of the multi-million-dollar television contracts in collegiate sports. But there's another lawsuit looming, one that could make college sports look a lot more like the pros.
They are pros who work without pay, and that's not fair. It's not right.
The NCAA says a free education, that's payment enough.
Many of these athletes do not get their degree or graduate.
Dominique Wilkins was one of those guys who didn't graduate.
A lot of times the kids come out a little too early because they see the money. The money is very enticing.
Wilkins left the University of Georgia after 3 years to enjoy a long and successful career in the NBA. He left school partly because he didn't want to wait to get paid, and that meant sacrificing his degree.
As young players, I was one of those guys, I wanted to help my family and myself.
So, in a billion-dollar business, what is a scholarship worth? On average, it's about $23,000. By comparison, a joint study by Drexel University and the National College Players Association found the average worth of a collegiate football player is about $120,000. It's about $265,000 for the average men's basketball player. Athletes who want to see reform say some colleges already make millions of dollars on TV contracts and then shell out the big bucks for top-of-the-line coaches and facilities. So why not include the players? Some fear paying players will change the landscape of college sports. A 2012 poll found that about 2/3 of sports fans thought a scholarship was enough.
I think the idea of paying salaries would be counterproductive.
That's former NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue. He spoke at the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics in March.
If a case can be made in a given conference or in intercollegiate sports generally that more resources should be invested to the benefit of players, I strongly believe the focus should be on investing in their academic opportunities.
But Jeffrey Kessler says education took a backseat to profits a long time ago.
There's nothing innocent or pure about that. It's a business.
We've asked the NCAA about this lawsuit, and they're not commenting on it. But they have said consistently in court that they believe they're protecting college athletics and all of the traditions that come with it by fighting to keep athletes from being paid with anything except a scholarship. Sarah Gannon, CNN, New York.
Finally tonight, the debate over big-time college sports and whether students should get paid. Ari Srinivasan picks up where he left off last night.
We heard tough criticism of both universities and of the NCAA in the wake of recent scandals involving players from several schools. It came from historian Taylor Branch, who wrote a 15,000-word essay in the latest issue of The Atlantic called The Shame of College Sports. Here's a bit of what he told us.
The essential problem is that we pretend that these adults are not entitled to a portion of the value that they earn. And we pretend that the problem with all of these scandals is that dirty athletes are getting money under the table. The problem is that we're not honest about it. Nowhere else in America do we forbid adults from seeking a portion of the highly valued services that they provide. And nowhere else would we think of saying, don't pay these people until I'm satisfied that it won't mess something up.
We asked the NCAA for an on-air response. They made available to us Joe Crowley. He's a former president of the University of Nevada at Reno. He served on key NCAA committees for more than 2 decades, and he's the author of a history of college sports called In the Arena, the NCAA's First Century. Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure to be here.
First of all, why you don't think students should be paid for playing big-time college sports?
Well, the NCAA is based fundamentally on the principle of amateurism, which Mr. Branch feels is a principle sadly out of date, and indeed no principle at all, and perhaps a hoax, because it isn't what it was 100 years ago, and that is true. The world has turned upside down a couple of times since then, and many other changes, and no concept, I think, in its pure state can last that long. Nevertheless, we believe, the NCAA believes, higher educational institutions believe that paying a student a grant in aid, a scholarship, is not a violation of that amateurism principle. So if we paid athletes to play for us, clearly they would not be, could not be amateurs, and we will stay as long, at least as it is possible, by adhering to the principle of amateurism, no pay for players.
In his piece, Taylor Branch makes the point that these are the players on the field. They wear the logos. They help pack the stands. It's their likeness that's in the video games. Why shouldn't they be able to profit from some of that?
Well, again, if they profit, they're workers. They're not amateurs, and there is a further huge problem. It's just a practical problem. There is no way, short of huge additional outlays, to hire athletes, to pay them for what they do. That means not just the stars of Division 1A, but the third string halfback in football, or the 13th bench player in basketball, and athletes in Divisions 2 and 3. Division 3 is a non-scholarship division, the biggest division in the NCAA, and it would come as a surprise to that division and the institutions within it that we're now going to pay your players to whom we wouldn't give and shouldn't give. That's the principle of Division 3 scholarships. In addition, there is Title IX. Surely, if we bestowed dollars on players who make a difference more than other players, we would have a tremendous tussle with the meaning of Title IX, which is equality for women, and to put this into institutions of higher education at a time when across the country budgets for higher educational institutions, public and private, are being reduced in double-digit numbers. It's just impracticable.
So the notion of student athlete that you've referred to, the NCAA has referred to, the critics say this is just legal wrangling, so you don't have to you can get around the work that they actually do on the field. You give them the pads, the tools to go do the job on the football field, but if they get injured there, they don't get workers' compensation.
Well, that's wrong on two counts. I mean, it is the case, as Mr. Branch points out, that in its origins, that was the intention. That was more than 50 years ago. However, it has developed into a centerpiece of athletics in higher education. If we are going to have students playing sports, we're simply not able to pay them. And that's the bottom line. That's the difference. The student athlete is a student athlete these days. The evidence is overwhelming on that score. If you look at academic reforms in the NCAA that have occurred over the last 20, 30, 40 years, if you look at the impact of those reforms, if you look at graduation rates of student athletes, including those in the top subdivision, you find them remarkable. In the case of my own institution, at the University of Nevada at Reno, our graduation rate is 78%. Here and in most, if not all, other institutions in the NCAA, those rates are higher than the rates of the general student population.
Which brings me to the topic of academics. The NCAA says that the academic performance is really first and foremost. It's secondary to athletic performance. If that's the case, a lot of the athletes point to something, a discrepancy. They say, listen, most of the contracts, almost contracts, the agreements or scholarships are 1 year at a time. If I get injured on the field, I am now unable to finish that great education that I got access to.
Well, I should point out as well that injuries are covered. They are insured. Student athletes do not have to pay to get better, to have surgery. The NCAA also has a multi-million-dollar catastrophic injury policy, which takes care of those really severe injuries. But the 1 year at a time really is no different from the way scholarships are generally given by institutions. Many scholarships are 1 year, freshman year typically. There are others that are 4-year scholarships, but you retain them only if you perform meritoriously. So you have to continue to be academically solid if you're going to continue to receive that non-athletic scholarship. The same applies in sports. If you're not performing meritoriously, the institution would have a right not to renew your scholarship, although I believe that seldom happens.
All right, Joe Crowley, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So many people in America see college sports as an extension, a very nostalgic extension of high school sports, right. Where the quarterback and a cheerleader have a romance and they celebrate their victory over the rivals at a malt shop. It's not that. It's a $6 billion a year industry. Last year, CBS and TBS split up $1 billion just off of March Madness. There's so much money being made, and the people who are creating this wealth do not get to participate, and they don't get to graduate, and that's a big issue.
We have to keep, I think, a good perspective on this. Obviously, we're talking here about football and men's basketball, but if we're going to start paying the football players, we have to pay the field hockey players, and we have to pay the men and women swimmers, and we have to pay the lacrosse players, softball players, baseball players, because there's something known as Title IX, Newt, signed by Richard Nixon, June 23rd, 1972, that mandates proportional, equal treatment under the law, no discrimination, when you're giving out federal funds for men and women, whether it be med schools, law schools, or sports. And there is no doubt in my mind that the moment, if we started to just pay football players and men's basketball players, you would have 12 lawsuits the first day, and you'd have 12 the next day, and every school would be sued because of this wonderful law, which I think the nation has embraced, the most important law, I think, in our country the last 41 years, Title IX, from your own party, Richard Nixon, and I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. So it sounds real simple, but when you start to break it down, these universities don't want to do this because of the legal possibilities.
The problem with that is, all right, the guys on the water polo team or some of the other teams, the swimming team, the diving team, they don't generate any revenue. If you look at the revenue, the people that come to sit in the stands when they're competing, very few, they don't pay a lot of dollars. Football and basketball are on national TV. They generate money for all of these national sponsors and advertisers. It's incredible how much money is being made. The president of the NCAA makes $1.7 million a year, yet the people who are performing and generating this cash do not get to participate in any way. And if they get hurt or anything, a lot of times they lose their scholarship. They don't even get to graduate. They have to pay their own way through school. I think that's a travesty, and something needs to be done about it. So many people.
Now, ESPN 106.3 and News Channel 5 present Football Night in South Florida.
Welcome into Football Night in South Florida, everyone. I'm Jason Pugh. What a night for the Atlantic Eagles, their football team, their fans, and for 7-year-old Mason Thomas, who suffers from AMC, a disease that results in the decreased flexibility of his joints. But that didn't stop Mason from scoring a touchdown tonight for the Eagles. Well, that was the scene at halftime tonight. Thomas, well, he has definitely found a second family in Atlantic High School these past few weeks. Tonight was the culmination of his time with the team. He's always defied the odds, and tonight he even surprised himself.
No, because there's like huge guys. They were trying to tackle me. One time there was a 3-liner, so I was like, where do I gotta go?
When he was born, he couldn't walk or he wouldn't move any of his limbs. The first thing he moved was just his pinky. So to come from 6 months old moving just a pinky to being on a football field, getting a touchdown during halftime is awesome.